Have you ever felt like your entire life was decided by someone else's choice? Someone who was supposed to protect you, but instead abandoned you? This is the story of a girl named Emily Parker, a girl who learned the meaning of betrayal at the youngest age possible. Emily grew up in a small American town in Ohio. To everyone else, her family looked picture perfect. A hardworking father, a beautiful mother, and a sweet little girl. But behind the closed doors of their cozy suburban home, cracks were forming, cracks that would soon shatter Emily's childhood forever. Her father, Daniel Parker, was known in the neighborhood as a kind man, but when he was with his wife and daughter, things were different. He was strict, sometimes cold, and most importantly, he always favored his wife, Julia, over his own daughter. Julia was the kind of woman who demanded attention. She didn't want to share her husband's love with anyone, not even with their little girl. And Daniel? He listened to her. Always. From as young as Emily could remember, Julia whispered poisonous words into Daniel's ear. She doesn't love you. She only wants your attention. She's selfish. And slowly, Daniel began to pull away from his daughter. By the time Emily was 10, she already felt like a stranger in her own home. At family dinners, her parents would laugh and talk to each other while she sat in silence, barely acknowledged. Birthdays passed with little celebration. School recitals went unattended. And every time Emily tried to get close to her father, Julia's sharp glare reminded her that she was unwelcome. But nothing prepared Emily for the day her world truly crumbled. One rainy evening, Julia sat Daniel down at the kitchen table and told him words that would change Emily's life forever. She's not good for us. She's not worth the trouble. You need to choose, Daniel, me or her. Emily, who had been hiding in the hallway, overheard everything. Her heart pounded as she waited for her father to defend her, to finally stand up as the man who promised to protect her. But Daniel's response cut through the air like a knife. I choose you, Julia. Always you. At just 11 years old, Emily realized she had been abandoned by the one man who should have loved her unconditionally. Her father chose his wife over his daughter. And from that moment, Emily's world went dark. But here's the thing about betrayal. It doesn't break everyone. Sometimes it lights a fire inside them. And Emily? She would carry that fire with her for years. She would bide her time, waiting, planning, until one day, the people who destroyed her childhood would feel the pain they had caused her. This is the story of how Emily turned her deepest wound into her ultimate revenge. Backhand index pointing right, stay with me, because what Emily does later will shock you. After that rainy night, Emily's childhood officially ended. Her father's choice haunted her. It wasn't just that he abandoned her, it was that he spoke the words out loud. He made his loyalty clear, and it wasn't to his daughter. From that day forward, Emily felt invisible. Her father would pass her in the hallway like she was a stranger renting space in his house. And her mother? Julia took every opportunity to remind Emily of her place. You heard your father, Julia would sneer. He chose me. That means you're nothing here. Emily learned to survive in silence. She buried her tears, replaced them with books, and clung to the dream that one day she'd escape. But silence has a way of transforming into something darker when left to grow. By the time she was a teenager, Emily wasn't just sad anymore. She was angry, furious. At school, she watched her friends hug their dads at soccer games, saw fathers show up at dance recitals with flowers, heard them cheer louder than anyone else. Every time, Emily felt that old wound reopen. But instead of crying, she clenched her fists and whispered to herself, one day, they'll regret it. And life at home only got worse. Julia turned more cruel as Emily grew into a young woman. She mocked her clothes, criticized her weight, compared her unfavorably to other girls. And Daniel? He just sat there, nodding along. One night, when Emily was 16, she overheard another conversation. This time, Julia wasn't just pushing Daniel away from his daughter. She was plotting to erase Emily from his life completely. She's almost 18, Daniel, Julia said coldly. When she graduates, she's gone. I want her out of this house the second she turns legal. No help, no college money, nothing. She needs to learn she's not welcome here. Emily pressed her hand over her mouth to keep from sobbing out loud. Her mother wanted her gone. Her father was silent. And that silence was an answer in itself. But Emily wasn't the weak little girl in the hallway anymore. She was older now, stronger, and she had a mind sharper than Julia ever realized. That night, Emily sat on her bed and made herself a promise. If her parents wanted her gone, fine. She would leave, but she would not disappear quietly. She would work, study, and build herself into someone powerful, someone they could never ignore again. And when the time was right, she would come back. Not for love, not for forgiveness, but for revenge. This was the moment Emily's life shifted. She stopped being a victim. She started becoming a strategist. The first sign of this came just a few months later. Julia had a prized possession, a diamond necklace that she bragged about to every guest who entered their home. Emily knew how much it meant to her. So, one evening, when Julia accused her of eating too much food and being a burden, Emily snapped. The next morning, Julia discovered the necklace was gone. She tore the house apart, screaming accusations, while Daniel tried to calm her down. Julia never found it. Emily never confessed. But every time she looked at her mother's frantic face, she smiled quietly to herself. It wasn't much, but it was her first taste of control, her first taste of revenge. And once you taste revenge, it's hard to stop. When Emily turned 18, Julia got her wish. The morning after graduation, Julia tossed a suitcase onto her bed. "You're done here," she said flatly. "This house isn't yours anymore. You're not our responsibility. Don't come crawling back when life eats you alive." Daniel stood by the doorway, arms crossed. He didn't say a word, not even goodbye. Emily swallowed her pain like poison and carried her suitcase out the door. With every step down that driveway, she reminded herself, this wasn't the end. It was the beginning. The world wasn't kind to Emily at first. She worked long shifts as a waitress, scraping together tips while sleeping on a friend's couch. College seemed impossible without her parents' support. But Emily was stubborn. She refused to give Julia and Daniel the satisfaction of seeing her fail. Instead, she studied at night, teaching herself business through free online courses. She saved every dollar she could. She networked, watched people, learned their habits. Every customer at the diner was like a study subject, what they wanted, how they acted when they got it, and how they behaved when they didn't. Emily was quietly building something inside herself that no one could take away: power. By 21, Emily had landed a scholarship through sheer determination and flawless applications. She dove into her studies with a hunger that terrified her professors. She wasn't just another student, she was a survivor, a strategist. While others partied, Emily was making plans. And the plan was simple: rise high enough that her parents would choke on the sight of her success. Her chance came when she interned at a major marketing firm. Emily was sharp, persuasive, and ruthless when she needed to be. Within months, she had outshined even the seasoned employees. By 25, she wasn't just surviving, she was thriving. She had her own apartment, her own car, and a reputation in the industry as someone who could turn any campaign into gold. But success wasn't enough. Emily wanted something more satisfying. She wanted revenge. She kept tabs on Julia and Daniel through social media. Julia posted fake smiles at fancy dinners, showing off her jewelry, pretending life was perfect. Daniel looked older, more tired, weighed down by regret he never admitted. Their lives looked polished on the outside, but Emily knew the truth. The cracks were there, and she planned to split those cracks wide open. One night, Emily sat in her sleek apartment, staring at her reflection in the glass window. She thought of her younger self, the girl who cried in the hallway, the teenager who hid her pain. That Emily was gone. In her place stood a woman who knew how to play the long game. And the first move? Infiltrating her parents' world in a way they'd never see coming. She started small. She reached out to one of Daniel's old business contacts, pretending not to know the connection. She offered brilliant marketing ideas, built trust, and soon had access to the very circles her father used to move in. Then came Julia. Remember that diamond necklace Emily had stolen years ago? She still had it, tucked away in a hidden box. Emily had waited for the right time to use it. And now she had a plan. She arranged for the necklace to reappear, but not in her mother's possession. Instead, she anonymously gifted it to a charity auction in the same city Julia prided herself on belonging to. When Julia saw her long-lost necklace on display, being sold to the highest bidder, her perfect facade cracked. She accused everyone around her, made a scene, and for the first time in years, society saw Julia not as the flawless woman she pretended to be, but as a paranoid, unstable mess. And Emily? She was watching from the shadows, smiling. This was just the beginning. Julia's meltdown at the charity auction had been delicious to watch. But Emily wasn't satisfied with humiliating her mother in public. That was just a warm-up. The real game was about to begin. Emily knew one thing. Money was her parents' weakness. Julia craved luxury like oxygen. Daniel lived for his reputation in business. If she could strike at both, their carefully crafted lives would crumble like wet paper. Through her growing network in the marketing world, Emily positioned herself closer to Daniel's old company. She discovered that while he still bragged about being a powerful businessman, the truth was very different. His empire was fragile, held together by debt and desperate deals. He wasn't the man he pretended to be, he was drowning. And Emily had just the storm to finish him off. She began consulting for one of Daniel's competitors, offering bold, innovative campaigns that boosted their sales. Every win for them meant a loss for Daniel. Slowly, his clients slipped away, preferring Emily's razor-sharp ideas and flawless execution. He didn't even know it was her. But Julia was harder. She had always been slippery, always able to twist a story in her favor. To break Julia, Emily needed patience. She studied her mother's online presence, noting every brand deal, every charity gala, every perfect post. Behind the photos, Julia was addicted to validation. So Emily started feeding rumors. Anonymous whispers in the right ears. Subtle comments at parties she now attended thanks to her growing influence. Julia was overstretched. Julia was desperate. Julia was losing her touch. The whispers spread like wildfire. By the time Julia caught on, the invitations to high society events had already started to dry up. Her friends, sensing weakness, began to pull away. Her perfect circle was turning against her. Meanwhile, Daniel faced disaster. Emily orchestrated a business deal that slipped through his fingers at the last moment, thanks to her pulling strings behind the scenes. He lost millions, and his credibility took another hit. The couple who once kicked Emily out with smug satisfaction were now living in a quiet panic. Their fights grew louder, their faces more strained. And Emily? She was only getting started. The final blow would be personal. She decided to re-enter their lives. Not as their daughter, but as someone they couldn't ignore. Someone they'd have to respect. She arranged a meeting with one of Daniel's business partners, a wealthy investor who had no idea Emily was his former stepdaughter. She dazzled him with her brilliance, her poise, her ability to read a room. Within weeks, she became his go-to strategist. One evening, he invited her to a dinner party. And there they were. Julia, dripping in fake pearls and forced charm. Daniel, trying to look confident despite the shadows under his eyes. They froze when they saw her walk in, radiant, successful, untouchable. Julia's smile faltered. Daniel's glass nearly slipped from his hand. Emily didn't flinch. She leaned in, kissed the investor's cheek, and said, "Thank you for the invitation. I'm honored to be here." She never once acknowledged them as her parents. To the room, she was someone entirely new. Someone more powerful than the people who once abandoned her. For the first time in their lives, Julia and Daniel felt small. And Emily savored every second. After that dinner party, Julia and Daniel could no longer deny the truth. Emily was no longer a broken girl they had discarded. She was a force. But the humiliation of facing her in public was only the beginning of their torment. Behind closed doors, Julia and Daniel's marriage was unraveling faster than either of them expected. Daniel blamed Julia for the rumors spreading about their reputation. Julia accused Daniel of being weak, of losing his grip on business. Their once picture-perfect mansion turned into a battlefield. Shouting matches replaced polite conversations. They barely looked at each other unless it was to hurl blame. And all the while, Emily was quietly turning the knife. Through subtle moves, she made sure that Daniel's business failures became more public. Journalists suddenly had leaks about his financial losses. Clients who were once loyal shifted their trust elsewhere. He tried to spin the narrative, but the damage was too deep. For Julia, the fall was more social than financial, but it cut just as sharply. The gala invitations had all but dried up, and the friends she once hosted at lavish brunches now avoided her calls. To them, Julia had become toxic. But what broke Julia most was the whisper she couldn't control. Daniel is losing everything. Her entire identity had been built around wealth, prestige, and the illusion of being untouchable. Without Daniel's empire propping her up, she was just another aging socialite clinging to fading beauty. Emily watched it all from the sidelines, her lips curling in satisfaction each time she overheard someone mention her mother's name with pity instead of envy. But she wasn't finished. She wanted to fracture them beyond repair. Emily orchestrated small, deliberate encounters that drove wedges between them. She accidentally let Daniel's business partner overhear that Julia had been venting about his incompetence at private gatherings. Then she ensured Julia stumbled across an anonymous tip that Daniel had been meeting with younger women under the guise of networking. Neither rumor was fully true, but both were believable enough to ignite suspicion. And suspicion, once planted, grows like wildfire. Julia became paranoid, checking Daniel's phone, interrogating him after late meetings. Daniel, already fragile from his losses, snapped under the pressure. Their fights escalated to the point where neighbors could hear through the mansion's thick walls. One night, Emily sat in her apartment, sipping wine, listening to a recording she'd secretly obtained from a contact, an audio of Julia screaming at Daniel, accusing him of betrayal. Daniel shouting back, swearing he had nothing left to give. Emily saved the file. It was her proof that the perfect marriage was no longer perfect, and she wasn't going to keep it private. Her plan was almost complete. One last push, and she could shatter them in front of the very society they once worshipped. She wanted the world to see Julia and Daniel the way she had always seen them, selfish, cruel, broken. Emily knew she couldn't just watch her parents collapse in private. It wasn't enough. Julia and Daniel had built their lives on public perception, on the applause of high society. If she wanted to truly destroy them, their downfall had to be visible. So she staged the perfect storm. It started with a charity gala. Julia had been desperate to claw her way back into the social scene, so when a minor local foundation agreed to host an event at the mansion, she seized the chance. She believed this was her moment to remind everyone that the Stewarts were still relevant. What she didn't know was that Emily had already infiltrated the guest list. A few carefully placed calls ensured that influential journalists, business rivals, and old friends who had turned their backs on Julia would all be in attendance. And Emily? She made sure she had a front-row seat. The night of the gala sparkled with chandeliers, champagne, and strained smiles. Julia wore her most dazzling gown, a mask of elegance covering the panic in her eyes. Daniel was stiff beside her, his face pale, sweat glistening at his temples. Everything seemed fine, until the screens lit up. Julia had arranged for a slideshow celebrating the family's legacy of success. Photos of the mansion, Daniel's companies, and Julia at past galas filled the screen. Guests clapped politely. But halfway through, the slideshow glitched. And suddenly, the images weren't polished photos anymore. They were screenshots. Screenshots of Daniel's failing business accounts. Leaked emails showing desperate pleas for investors. Whispered rumors about affairs. Even a bank statement revealing just how much debt the Stewarts had accumulated. The room went silent. Gasps spread like wildfire. Whispers turned into open stares. Julia's face drained of all color. Daniel leapt forward, shouting for the tech team to shut it off, but it was too late. The damage had been done. And then came the final blow. The audio. The very recording Emily had saved weeks before. Julia screaming at Daniel, accusing him of betrayal, and Daniel shouting back that he was ruined, poured through the speakers. The words echoed through the grand ballroom, louder than any music ever played there. Julia's hands trembled as she grabbed Daniel's arm, begging him to fix it. But Daniel had no strength left. His shoulders slumped, his pride shattered. And from the back of the room, Emily sipped her champagne. She watched as her parents, the people who had discarded her like trash, crumbled under the weight of their own lies. For the first time, Julia wasn't the queen of the room. She was the spectacle. By the end of the night, the Stewarts were finished. Their guests avoided them. Journalists scribbled furiously in their notepads, and business rivals smirked in satisfaction. Julia fled the ballroom in tears. Daniel left in silence. Emily? She walked out slowly, savoring every second. Her plan had worked. But even as the thrill of victory burned in her chest, she knew one thing. Revenge doesn't end with exposure. It ends with silence. The kind of silence that follows when everyone who once admired you now pities you. And Emily wasn't done twisting the knife. The night after the gala, Julia and Daniel Stewart sat in the same mansion that had once been their empire. But the silence inside its gilded walls was heavier than ever before. No staff bustled about. No guests lingered in laughter. Even the chandeliers seemed dimmer, as though the house itself was ashamed of its owners. Julia locked herself in the upstairs bedroom, refusing to leave. She'd always been the image of poise, her every move rehearsed for admiration, but now, her reflection was her worst enemy. The mirror mocked her with dark circles under her eyes, smudged mascara, and the hollow expression of a queen dethroned. Downstairs, Daniel was worse. He spent the entire night pacing the study, clutching his phone, making desperate calls to colleagues. But one by one, they stopped answering. Business partners avoided him. Investors pulled out. Banks demanded immediate repayment of debts. By morning, the empire was in ruins. News outlets wasted no time. Headlines screamed, "Stewarts exposed. The fall of a family dynasty." Pictures of Julia crying at the gala circulated online, immortalized in memes and gossip blogs. Her sharp tongue and icy glare, the tools she had once wielded to dominate others, were now weapons turned against her. Daniel fared no better. His companies were dragged through the mud. Reporters dug up old scandals. Former employees came forward with stories of unpaid wages and ruthless firings. Every skeleton in their closet was ripped out for the world to see. The phone never stopped ringing, but it wasn't friends calling. It was creditors, lawyers, tabloids. And through it all, Emily stayed silent. She didn't need to add anything. Her parents were doing all the destruction themselves. The world no longer admired them. It laughed at them. And that kind of shame was deeper than any wound she could have inflicted alone. But Emily wasn't driven by cruelty. No, she wanted justice. And justice demanded that the punishment fit the crime. Her parents had once discarded her like an inconvenience, stripping her of her place in their world. Now, she watched them stripped of everything they held dear. Weeks passed. The mansion, once alive with luxury, grew emptier. Staff quit without notice. Bills piled up. Auctioneers came to list valuables for sale. Julia clung to her jewelry like a drowning woman clutching a lifeboat, but even that wouldn't save her. Daniel stopped fighting altogether. He aged years in just a month, his shoulders permanently hunched, his once commanding voice reduced to a whisper. Julia, meanwhile, barely left her bed. Gossip magazines called her a ghost of her former self. Emily visited once, standing at the gates while movers hauled away furniture. She watched from a distance unseen, and for the first time, she felt a strange pang. Not regret, but recognition. Her parents weren't the monsters she'd painted them to be. They were just people, flawed, greedy, selfish people who had finally been forced to face the truth. And as she turned away from the crumbling mansion, Emily realized something important. Revenge had given her justice. But it wasn't revenge that gave her peace. It was walking away. Months had passed since the night of the gala, but for Emily, it felt like a lifetime. The whirlwind of scandal that had destroyed her parents had long since quieted. The tabloids had moved on to new prey, investors had shifted their attention elsewhere, and society had found fresh gossip to chew on. The Stuarts were no longer a dynasty. They were a cautionary tale. For Emily, however, the silence wasn't empty. It was freeing. She no longer walked with the invisible weight of her parents' cruelty pressing on her shoulders. For years, she had been defined by their rejection, their constant reminder that she wasn't enough to fit their perfect image. But now, that image itself was shattered. And Emily was still standing. One bright morning, she walked through the city where her parents had once ruled every boardroom, every gala, every whisper of high society. But this time, heads didn't turn toward her in pity or recognition. No one saw her as Julia and Daniel's forgotten daughter. She was simply Emily. She had reclaimed her identity. Instead of chasing wealth or status, she pursued something entirely different: peace. She poured her energy into helping others who had been cast aside the way she once was. She volunteered at shelters, mentored young women, and used her education and talents to build a career built on kindness rather than cruelty. And slowly, Emily realized something her parents never had. True power didn't come from money, connections, or fear. It came from freedom, the kind of freedom that only arrives when you let go of needing validation from the very people who hurt you. But closure isn't always neat. One afternoon, Emily received a letter. The handwriting was shaky, almost unrecognizable, but she knew instantly who it was from. Her mother. The letter wasn't long. Julia apologized, not with excuses, not with arrogance, but with genuine regret. She admitted her failings, her blindness, and the poison of pride that had destroyed her family. And for the first time in Emily's life, Julia called her daughter. Emily sat in silence for a long time after reading it. The anger, the grief, the scars of her childhood, they all pulsed within her like old wounds reopening. But then she breathed. She folded the letter and placed it in a drawer. She didn't forgive instantly. Wounds that deep don't heal overnight. But she did something even more powerful. She chose not to carry them anymore. And that was enough. That night, Emily walked along the river, watching the city lights shimmer on the water. She thought of everything she had lost, everything she had gained, and everything she had yet to build. For the first time in her life, the future didn't terrify her. It excited her. Revenge had been the spark that freed her, but peace was the fire that would keep her warm for the rest of her life. As she whispered to herself under the quiet night sky, one truth became clear. They tried to bury me, but they forgot. I was a seed.